Hello, and welcome back to our 29th live stream. We're glad that you've joined us tonight, and we are ready to start answering your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. Now, the name of tonight's live stream, which was a copper penny for your thoughts, is kind of a play on 29. 29 being the atomic number of the metal copper. So there's a little science geekery going on there. Again, like all our other live streams, the rules are the same. Super chats have priority. If you want to ask a non-super chat question, begin the question with a Q and a colon. Also, please only ask your question once. And if you refer to a passage in the Bible, such as a quote from the Bible, please include the verse. Or if you do say, for example, ask a question about a specific word, please tell me what you think it means so I know exactly, have a little context to work with. So you might have noticed too that we have now a scrolling bar at the bottom that lays all these rules out. So if you forget the rules, they're down there. So anyway, with that said, let's get to your questions. And we're going to start off with 3 non-super chats. Okay. The first non-super chat question is from Chow Yi. Dr. Falk, have you ever thought of doing book reviews? Yes. I would love to hear your opinion upon the magic section system in Riordan's Kane Chronicles. Now, I have thought about doing book reviews, but I don't do book reviews. And that's not really true. I do book reviews for peer-reviewed journals. However, book reviews take a long time to do. And I really just don't have the time to do them for YouTube. So that's really why I don't do book reviews on YouTube. The other reason is on say YouTube, it's such a audio visual format. Doing something that's more audio is not exactly a winning formula on YouTube. So I don't think the medium of YouTube plays well to book reviews. However, with that said, I do actually have an opinion on magic systems that are in fiction, even though I have not read Riordan's Kane Chronicles. My opinion is generally that it depends upon how the metaphysics of the author's worlds are constructed. Let's take, for example, say the magic system in The Lord of the Rings. In The Lord of the Rings, the magic system is based mostly upon the inherent abilities that Ilu-Avatar has given the people. So magic for them is just an extension of basically their nature that was given to them by the godlike being. So that sort of magical system would still be consistent within a Christian worldview. However, where you have, say, Harry Potter, where it's a magical system that is disruptive in nature. It disrupts the natural order. We would call this, for example, the difference sort of between, say, sympathetic magic versus disruptive magic. Now, this is not saying that all sympathetic magic is say, God-ordained. However, if it were to be something that's consistent with the Christian worldview, it would be more along the lines of sympathetic magic than, say, disruptive magic. And it's clear that the magical system in Harry Potter disrupts the natural worldview. So I do have, say, some opinions upon, say, magical systems that are found in, say, games and fiction. And some of them are definitely more consistent with the Christian worldview than others. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I appreciate it. It's a good question. Okay, our second non-super chat. On a scale of 1 to 10, how annoying is it to hear Modern historians claim Moses must have been made up because Moses is an Egyptian word. 9. 9.5. Thank you very much for the question. All right. And the third non-super chat question from Marcy Powell, sorry. Do you know anything on the historicity of Darius the Mede? We don't actually have a lot of non-biblical sources from. In fact, the only source we have for Darius the Mede is from Scripture itself. Now, that doesn't mean that Darius the Mede didn't exist. I think one of the best sort of views I found on this was, I think it was done by Donald J. Wiseman. And Wiseman postulated that kings in the ancient Near East could have, say, many different names, such as, for example, Tiglath-Pileser could sometimes be called Pul, P-U-L. So it was speculated by Wiseman that Darius the Mede was just another name for Cyrus. So I think that's at least a good working hypothesis. Again, we just don't have enough information here to say for sure. But I'm also not going to subscribe to an absence of evidence argument here, because I think, wow. I mean, so many historians have tried absence of evidence arguments and end up with egg on their face. It just isn't even funny. I mean, it's just crazy how many historians have done this, gone down this road and just ended up with egg on their face. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I hope that answers the question. We just don't have enough to be evidence to be sure, but I think there's at least a plausible explanation for it. Okay. So now let's get into the super chats. Now, our first super chat is from Brick Creation for $20. Thank you very much for that super chat. Very generous. Hi, Dr. Falk. Sorry, last question about the tomb of Talpiot. Okay, man. I'm cool. It's good. You're helping fund the channel. If we want to engage this, that's absolutely cool with me. What do you think of about the James ossuary? Could it be related to Jesus or the tomb of Talpiot? People say that it has the same soil as the tomb, inscription forgery. Wow, now this is going to be a very controversial issue. Very, very controversial issue. The James ossuary, unfortunately, was held by a person who also ran a forgeries factory. That is going to be very, very problematic, and we're not going to know for sure exactly. The fact is, too, that, when they did, they were able to take iron samplings from the inscription, and they found metal alloy in those inscriptions. Now that date to a modern time, isotopically. The problem is going to be, was he indeed cleaning it, or did he create at least part of the inscription? Now, almost everyone agrees that part of this inscription is original. It's sort of, say, the extra bit of the inscription that's contested here. I don't think we're ever going to know for sure. I think there's too much sort of there's too much hanky-panky going on here to really be sure. His excuse that his mother took modern water from a modern source and used that to clean the ossuary also doesn't exactly sound credible. It's an incredulous explanation. Yeah, I'd love to say this thing's valid, but I just can't. I just there's just so much here that's wrong that I don't think we can use it as really good evidence at this point for anything. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. I very much appreciate it. And overall, I don't think we need this to show, say, the existence of Jesus Christ. I mean, there's more than enough extra biblical evidence to establish Jesus Christ as a historical person that we don't actually need this anyway. And frankly, I think this is really just not good evidence. So, with that said, thank you very much, and we're going to move on to the next super chat. And the next super chat is from Disciples Riddle for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Bowen claimed Ezekiel falsely prophesied that Nebuchadnezzar would destroy Tyre. Alexander the Great completed the devastation. Ezekiel doesn't mention his name. How would you respond to this? Oh boy. Bowen here has some of the strangest historical explanations that I have ever heard from any historian anywhere. His argument here is just bizarre. Oh, let me flesh out how the argument works here. Okay. He says that the Bible prophesies that Nebuchadnezzar would siege the city of Tyre for 12 years. And then, he says, well, he was there, but then other people come in. The Persians come in and do some destruction, and then Alexander the Great does some destruction. It finally destroys the city entirely, and there's many other nations that come up against Tyre and destroy it. And he says, well, all these other nations destroyed Tyre so fast that the 12-year 13-year destruction of Tyre prophesied in the Bible isn't credible. Therefore, there was no destruction by Nebuchadnezzar. OMB. I mean, I can't believe I'm even hearing this. This verse, 2 Chronicles, there's let's see here, 2 Chronicles. That may be something else, but okay. But anyway, I listen to this and I go, I can hardly believe what that this is coming out of a historian's mouth. I mean, first of all, the 13-year destruction of Tyre isn't in the Bible. Okay? It comes from Josephus. And Josephus is getting this from Phoenician documents. So, it's like, okay, what we have here is Phoenician documents documenting Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Tyre. But not only that, there's cuneiform tablets. We have a cuneiform tablet that says that the soldiers of Babylon equipped themselves for a siege of Tyre. And then we have other cuneiform tablets that say that Tyre became a vassal state of Babylon. That pretty much sounds like the prophecy fulfilled to me. I mean, there's this sort of machinations of, well, he destroyed it, but he really didn't, because it was too long. We can't even believe it, because other successors came along and conquered it quicker. Well, I mean, that's just crazy talk. I mean, that's just absolute. I mean, that's so illogical. It is not even funny. I mean, we don't know the state of Tyre's walls when Nebuchadnezzar arrived. I mean, maybe he was up against these huge Middle Bronze fortifications that he had to just rip down. I mean, you just don't know. And then afterwards may have been replaced by casemate walls. We don't know. But to just assume because it took so long for the first guy and everyone after it was so quick, therefore the first guy couldn't have happened, is just silly. I mean, it's historical nonsense, and I can hardly I can hardly believe that someone of Josh's acumen and education would make such a ridiculous argument. It's just crazy. It is absolute craziness. Ask me what I really think about this. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I think you got my opinion about this. I appreciate the super chat, even though it raised my blood pressure about 50 points. Okay, let's see what else we got here now. Okay, Gizgo SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is it true that Egypt lost contact with Nubia after Dynasty 20? Well, that's a yes and no. Basically, the Theban and basically Delta regions did. How is Shishak able to recruit Kushites from the army as recorded in Chronicles? It's because Shishak was a Kushite, essentially.
Near the bottom, Second Chronicles 12.
Well, let's look at Second Chronicles 12 anyway. 12:3. So Second Chronicles 12:3. I'll start at 2 here, and it came about in King Rehoboam's 5th year, because they had been unfaithful to the Lord, that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen, and the people who came from Egypt were without number. The Lubim, that's actually Libyans. It's Libyans. The Sukim and the Ethiopians, which is in the Hebrew, Kushi, which is the descendants of Cush. Now, these are Cushites. These aren't Nubians. These are Cushites. And Cushites actually inhabited the region between Thebes and Nubia. So here, it doesn't actually say Nubians per se, but it is Cushites. So that's what's happening there. And this is, Egypt had never lost contact with Cush. Never did. It was always, say, part of, say, the close, in the same way that Egypt never lost contact with Sinai, Egypt never lost contact with Cush. It was a very, very close neighbor. And it was actually, for most of Egypt's history, part of Upper Egypt. In fact, sort of the boundary between Cush and Nubia is what would be called Abu Simbel, or the Second Cataract. So Egypt always had sort of that contact with that region. So that's how they were able to recruit the Cushites. They are because essentially the essence of this question here is that Cushites aren't in Nubia. Nubia is actually further south from Cush. However, at the same time too, we do see that there is still contact, at least some contact with Nubia, going at least until the end of Dynasty 25. And that's when of course, Nubia conquers Egypt itself. So there's a lot here that's going on, but again, we kind of got a little bit of confusion of categories here, but it's a good question. It's a good question, and I very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Okay. See, here we got Tony G for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What were the great plagues suffered by Pharaoh in his house? Genesis 12:17, for taking Sarah as his wife. Who was that Pharaoh, and did he cuckold Abraham? Let's read the passage, because that always helps. So Genesis 12 and 17. I'll start at verse 16. Therefore he treated Abraham well, this is Pharaoh, for her sake, and gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house and the great plagues because of Sarai, Abraham's wife. Okay. We don't know what exactly the plagues here were. The text doesn't say. The text is not specific. Wish we knew, but we don't. Now, it was not so much here that Pharaoh did not actually cuckold Abraham. But he could have. There was the potential here for that to happen. And Pharaoh here acts actually really righteous. You know, he's not a Pharaoh in this case, and we have to understand this is talking about the king of Egypt. The term Pharaoh in this text is anachronistic. It shows us when the text was actually put down to paper, but not when the events happened. This is what's called retrojection, where a later writing of the text with a current understanding is talking about events in the past. The term Pharaoh wasn't used until, say, the time of Thutmose III. But what it's talking about here is something that happened in Egypt's Middle Kingdom period. Now, when Pharaoh finds out that he's been tricked by Abram, he says to him in verse 18, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? So Pharaoh is the king of Egypt is legitimately put out by this, you know, and we have to understand that not every king of Egypt was a bad guy. A lot of the kings of Egypt, you know, tried to do well for their people and tried to do things properly. And I think this is one of those examples of a righteous Gentile. You know, and we do see these sort of scattered through scripture of Gentiles who try to do the right thing, even though they're not given the law. So I think that's what we have here in the Genesis 12 narrative is Pharaoh doing the right thing and Abram doing the wrong thing. So we don't know who the name of the Pharaoh is. And part of the problem is that Abraham lived during the 13th dynasty. And many of the pharaohs that we have for the 13th dynasty didn't reign that long. Most of them reigned less than 10 years, with a lot of them reigning around 2. Very short-lived, and we don't know why the pharaohs of Dynasty 13 were so short-lived. But as a rule, they seem to have been very short-lived. So we have a lot of pharaohs that reigned during Dynasty 13. So it's really impossible to say which pharaoh was the one that lived during the time of Abraham. So anyway, I hope that answers your super chat. Thank you very much appreciated. Okie dokie. CNMK for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Opinion on archaeologist Israel Finkelstein's work. Wow. That's a tough... It's not a tough question. It's how do I say this politely? Israel Finkelstein really doubles down on his biblical minimalism. And I don't... He really only has admirers now. In Israel, people kind of laugh at him. People kind of laugh at him because he really still sort of... For him, it's really... how did... For him, he still doubts the Davidic kingdom, the Solomonic kingdom. And he still has his admirers in North America. But Israeli archaeology has sort of moved beyond that. So he's sort of clinging to the past here, kind of hoping that he might be vindicated in the end. And with every turn of the shovel, it's just getting worse and worse and worse for him. So he's becoming kind of a pathetic shadow of what he once was. There was a time when Israel Finkelstein was considered to be the absolute expert in Israeli archaeology. That's no longer true. There are many now that have surpassed him in both quality and quantity. And I personally don't take him seriously anymore. He's kind of become a bit of a joke in Israeli archaeology. So, his book still has some interesting things in it, but his skepticism is sort of passé at this point. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Steven Sorensen for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What's your take on radiocarbon dating? Ooh. Well, I did see your video, by the way, on Fiamenko's views on radiocarbon dating. Let's be honest. Radiocarbon dating has problems. I think when it's used to try to establish absolute dates, it's extremely problematic. It does have errors. It does manifest anomalies, and you do see this in the practice of archaeology, and particularly the archaeology of the ancient Near East. There is something about radiocarbon in the ancient Near East that does not play nice with radiocarbon dating. Some have speculated that in the ancient Near East you've got a carbon sink. Attempts to correlate radiocarbon dating with dendrochronology have not exactly been successful in the Near East because trees don't form tree rings in the ancient Near East. So there isn't a separation of carbon between the tree rings like you find in, say, the northern or even the deep southern hemispheres. So radiocarbon dating has not been that useful in the ancient Near East. Now, with that said, I think radiocarbon does have a particular use. If you got, say, two samples, and you radiocarbon date them, and they have reasonable parity between them, like, for example, two samples of wood, the one thing you can determine is which one is older than the other. Radiocarbon dating will give you relative dating. And that can still be very, very useful. Even if it doesn't give you absolute dating, just knowing that one piece of wood is 150 years older than the other can be very, very helpful. So it does have its uses. And I don't completely discard radiocarbon dating. But I also recognize that radiocarbon dating does have some limitations. And I don't take the view of, say, dendrochronologists that want to say, oh, radiocarbon dating will give you absolute dates down to the year, because it won't in the ancient Near East. It just will not do that. You know, I was at a paper once where Hendrik Bruins, who's a dendrochronologist. Now, for those who don't know, dendrochronology is basically tying radiocarbon dating with tree rings. And Hendrik Bruins tried to make the case. He was debating Manfred Betock over the dating of Avaris, and Hendrik Bruins made the most jaw-droppingly incredulous statement I'd heard in a long time, was that the Hyksos dynasty ended 100 years before Ahmose the First. Based upon dendrochronology and radiocarbon dating, and everyone in the audience's jaw just dropped. You know, we couldn't believe what we were hearing, because we have historical records of Ahmose the First sieging the city of Avaris and its Hyksos kings. So it's just like, okay, well, you know, maybe there's still some bugs here in radiocarbon dating that need to be worked out. Yeah. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Gizgo SBOL again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How extensively did Ramses III campaign in the Levant? And how would this have affected the Israelite tribes during the Judges period? Okay. The campaigns of Ramses III are actually pretty limited. They're actually mostly limited to the coastal plain, as were most of the campaigning, say, after Merneptah. So this actually would not have affected the Israelite tribes all that much, because the Israelite tribes are more or less restricted to, say, the Judean foothills. We do have to kind of understand that ancient Israel was a divided geography. It had natural barriers that did prevent, say, large armies from moving here and there. You had the desert in the south. The coastal plain was on the west, and the Philistines lived there. Separating the coastal plain from the Judean foothills was a swamp. And it was a swamp that was very difficult for an army to move through. Now, people did move through the swamp piece by piece, but it's difficult to get an army through there. In order to invade the Judean foothills, one really had to go up to the Jezreel Valley, circle past Megiddo, and sort of come back down into the Judean foothills. For most Egyptian armies, this wasn't practical, and it really wasn't worth most armies until, say, Shishak. So you're really sort of waiting until say the 22nd dynasty for the Judean foothills to be really worth anyone's bother. So essentially, Ramses III is just bypassing the Judean foothills. He's going up the coastal plain, and he's doing his campaign up into, at most, into Syria at that point. And then after that, he's coming just straight back down. And that's just because he doesn't want to deal with sort of goat herders in the Judean foothills. You know, there's no profit there for him to do. So it really wouldn't affect the tribes in the Judges period at all. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Devin Canada for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, George Rawlinson claimed in his History of the Phoenicians that the Canaanite pantheon of gods originally started as a single god called by different titles. Do you have a take on this? Is George cool? I'd say not. Now there is sort of a school of religious historical thought called the German is Religious Geschichte, which means the religious history or religious history school, Religio Geschichte School, and or Schule. My German is not up to par at the moment. So, but anyway, the idea is that religions evolved over time. And the idea with sort of evolving religions is that people moved from, say, one sort of religion to another. The idea of going from, say, animism to polytheism to henotheism to monotheism. Now, there's also sort of the reverse of this as well, where people think that people went from, say, monotheism or a monolatry to a henotheism to a polytheism, etc. Um, I don't think that that you can really hear make the claim of, say, that in Ugarit and Phoenicia, that they went from a one god pantheon to many gods, or many titles leading to many gods. I don't think that's a credible case. It does seem to be that there's a whole myth here, and say the Canaanite Ugaritic documents that they have passed on since from ancient times. So, so that's sort of my take on this. It might be cool in other respects. I mean, I don't know. I haven't read George Wallinson, so I can't say more about it. But I don't think he's right here. I think we got more than enough evidence from, say, the Baal cycle to say that it's not just one. It's not a modalist god happening in ancient Canaan. It does seem to be a pure polytheism, or at the very minimum, a henotheism. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, I'm going to take this comment by Mr. Rich B.O.B. You said you went to Paris and were begged not to speak French ever again. After hearing your German, I can see why. Oh, absolutely true. My pronunciation of French and German is atrocious. Oh, I can read the things, but I couldn't communicate in it to save my life. I mean, my pronunciation is just awful. And I'm the first person to admit it. So, guilty as charged. Yeah. It's true of any language that essentially the more you use a language, the better your pronunciation becomes. And I just don't have any opportunity. I mean, I live in Vancouver. Vancouver is a 98% English speaking city. The second most common language spoken in Vancouver is Cantonese, followed by Punjabi. So even though French is officially in a bilingual country with very few people have the opportunity in Vancouver to actually practice their French to any meaningful degree, and less so for German, honestly. So with that said, my Japanese and surprisingly even my Arabic is much better than my French or German, at least, and that's because I've had more opportunity to use it in a spoken capacity. So Steven Sorensen says, I only speak English and still have trouble with that sometimes. Well, I was just recently asked on an interview, how many languages do I know? And I said, and she goes, besides English. And I said, well, English is the one I'm least sure about. I did a peer review article once, and this German, I'm a native English speaker, and the peer reviewer said, his English is really idiosyncratic. He must be a foreign English student. He needs to improve his level of English. It's like, no, English is my first language, which means I'm incompetent at English. How do you tell an English speaker, a native English speaker, he doesn't know the language? Of course. The Anabaptist says, I only speak English and barely learned that. Yeah. Yep, that is true for most native English speakers. So it's really difficult for English speakers to learn foreign languages, and it's just a part of it is because we don't know our own language that well. So let's get back to the super chats, but this has been fun. Okay. Tony G, I think, is next here with a $9.99 super chat. Was Exodus a military operation with Moses as general per Richard Gabriel on History Channel Bible Battle series? For example, Exodus 30, 12, 16, despoiling the Egyptians. Oh, History Channel. Oh my gosh. The History Channel is just awful. When I teach, I do sometimes teach the history of ancient Egypt at university. And at a university setting. And one of my biggest problems as a history teacher is sort of deprogramming the students of the History Channel. Because the History Channel isn't about history. It's about ancient aliens and Nazis. And it's just... Oh my gosh, the History Channel is just terrible. It's some of the worst history that you will find anywhere. I mean, it is really well, I mean, I've seen some just crazy stuff on the History Channel that it should not be called the History Channel. It's an ironically named channel because it is nothing even close to history. Now, with that said, the Exodus was not a military operation. Moses, in all likelihood, was not a general. He was probably no more than a scribe. He grew up in the house of a governor, perhaps vizier, but he himself was not actually part of the royal court when he lived in Egypt. It's only recognized that he was a son of a daughter of king after his return from Midian. And that's, again, God. This is God's providence being set up in the life of Joseph here. Or sorry, Moses here. The despoiling of Egypt is not Moses sweeping through Avaris and P. Ramses, stealing people's stuff. That's not what it is. It's essentially one person going to each other's neighbor and saying, hey, I'm leaving Egypt. Can you give me some stuff for the trip? And people going, yeah, okay, here's some stuff for the trip. That's really what the despoiling of Egypt is. Because we see that in the text that the people of Egypt had, the people of the sons of Jacob had found favor in the eyes of the Egyptian. So this is pretty much a historical reconstruction that defies what the text actually says. So I think Gabriel here is talking complete nonsense. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Tyler McKaylee for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Which part of the Old Testament have Egyptian vocabulary? Torah, historical, wisdom, etc. Examples of Egyptian loanwords in the text. Okay. There's actually several Egyptian loanwords in the Egyptian text. We find the occurrence to be much higher in the Torah, and then it sort of starts to wane off. We find some more in, say, the books of Judges and Joshua, and then we start seeing them sort of disappear in, say, the later prophets and the historical books. So that's sort of where most of them are in the Torah, very, very much in the Torah. So, like, for example, the word Ya'ir comes from Neru in Egyptian. We see, for example, sesh as Egyptian linen. There's actually 2 Egyptian loan words for linen in the Pentateuch. We see the word suf as in reeds, which comes from the Egyptian word tufi. We see lapis, mafkat in there. There's a lot of Egyptian loan words. I think it's something like 30, 40 Egyptian loan words that we find in, say, the Pentateuch alone. So teba, the basket that the baby Moses is stuck in, also Noah's Ark is a teba. This is an Egyptian word for a basket or box or chest. So they're mostly in the Torah. There's some are found, as I said, it tapers off. Interestingly enough, it sort of tapers off with what we come to expect with the biblical narrative. So, you know, as we sort of go later and later, we start to see a transition from, say, Egyptian words, a transition as far as loan words from non-Semitic languages, from Egyptian in, say, the Torah, to, say, more Persian words, where you're getting into Ezra, Nehemiah, Micah, even, say, books of Kings and Chronicles. You're starting to see more entry of Persian words at that point. And again, this is all come to this should be expected, because, you know, those are the books, the later books of, say, Kings, Chronicles, Nehemiah, that are sort of written and compiled during the Babylonian exile and later. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Cheese 1 for Australian $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Enjoying your book. It really struck me that the average farmer only had a bowl and a spoon. Yeah. The average farmer did not live well in Egypt. The average farmer was really, really poor. I mean, really poor. Did farmers do anything recreational or just survive? That's a good question. There are examples of, say, flutes from ancient Egypt. The flute does seem to have been something that a average farmer could have cobbled from a papyrus reed. It does not have to necessarily have been made out of wood. So there are a lot of things that the average farmer could have done. They could have there was the potential for them to do music at night, or in the evening. Most of the daylight hours were pretty much spent farming. The Egyptians did play games. Now, we're not sure about the farming class. Now, one of the problems with the farming class is they didn't leave us any records. And the land they tilled, the land they lived on, was pretty much wiped out every inundation cycle by the flood. So we don't have any archaeological remains for farmers either. So we have a real difficult time trying to assess how the farming class lived. So we have a few burials of farmers, and this is how we know that they didn't have many goods, because most farmers were sort of buried in pan graves. They weren't even mummified. They basically dug a hole, threw the body in sort of a fetal position with a bowl and a spoon, and that's it. That was their whole worldly possessions. Yeah, it wasn't exactly a great life, but, you know, it was their life. And I'm glad you're enjoying the book. Thank you very much for purchasing the book. I hope you really, really are enjoying it. We did make that book to be very readable, and yet also it's a really, really challenge. One of the most challenging things an author can ever do is try to write a book that both appeals to a lay person and a scholar at the same time. It's one of the hardest tasks any author can ever do. And we're kind of pleased that we have actually been so successful with this. Because most of the time when you try this, it doesn't work out well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for buying the book. Very much appreciate it. Okay. And a $4.99 super chat from Logan and Barzy. Thank you very much. I know you've dealt with the issue of the 600,000 before, but what specific view do you tend to side with that best explains the large numbers? Oh, I'm still in sort of the camp where I don't think we have enough evidence yet. I still want to see more evidence on this. And which is why I haven't actually taken a lot of sides on this. Now, as I said before in previous questions on this, that the ancient documents across the ancient Near East do have inflated numbers when it comes to persons involved, whether it's a military conflict, whether it's a siege of a city. This just seems to be the normal way of relaying events in ancient times, was to inflate the numbers of populations. We don't know why. And that is going to be the sort of the sticky wicket of this, is we don't know why they're doing this. If we knew why they were doing this, we might be able to see how they were doing this. So it's very difficult for me to comment on that much further. Now, the idea that Aleph represents a clan or an army, yeah, that does have credibility. I mean, that explanation is definitely credible. Does it explain the 50s though? Because some of these numbers also are, say, precise down to the term 50. If some bright scholar someday finds an explanation for the term 50, then we have it. Then we have the explanation. But I'm also humble enough before the text to say that that sometimes even I don't know what's going on in the Bible here. But all I can say too is I can't dismiss the account either, because it is such a common occurrence in ancient documents. So I'm actually going to take a supplemental question that just came up, because I think that actually helps this a bit. So let's see here. But anyway, I want to thank you for the super chat, and very much appreciate it. But I'm going to actually take this as well, because it sort of dovetails on this, which is Mr. Rich B.O.B. How do we know that they were inflated? Could it not be that there simply isn't much evidence of larger populations? Okay. Part of the problem is, say, the size of the cities involved. The city of Avaris was 250 hectares. A Middle Kingdom Semitic settlement like Lahun, which is well documented, and the demographics are well known, averages at about 800 persons per hectare. So with 250 hectares, you've got, it's a tell. There's a limitation of space. You are confined on the tell by the rising and falling of the river. You can't grow your population beyond, say, the high water level. So you are limited to that 250 hectare space. So, simple math will tell you that the population of Avaris could not be larger than say the low six figures. So that is just one of those things that, you know, you're just not going to get past, is that the limitation of the geography of Avaris limits the population to less than 200,000. Now, you can say that you know, when they're going through the land of Egypt as they leave, say through Sukkot and Pithom, they might be picking up another 50,000 at Sukkot, another 50,000 at Pithom, which seems to be a reasonable size for Pithom, and then they go through Pihahi Road, and there's a bunch of towns around Pihahi Road in that, say, south of the Pelusiac estuary that may have held Semitic peoples as well, that might have joined in the Exodus as well. So I think that it might cap out at 600,000. The problem is, how are we going to read that 600,000? Like, for example, when it talks about the 600,000, it talks about 600,000 Gabor, but then which are basically, you know, fighting people who can fight. At least in the early Semitic texts. Later on, it means men. But there is another passage that does, you know, take into account the Becca, say the redemption tax, which was applied to those aged 20 and older, and the tax came out to 600,000 people, both male and female. And I think what's going on here is there's a misreading of the text in some respects, that say it takes that 600,000 and says, okay, it's just 600,000 men. This is where I think the inflation comes in, is through interpretation. So you get 600,000 men of fighting age. That's ages 20 to 60. And then you've got 600,000 women. And then you add 40% for your children and your senior citizens. And this is how people get the 2 million figure. And I think that figure is wrong. That figure is inflated. Now, the 600,000 also might be inflated. And the only reason I say it might be inflated is because we do have, say, documents from the ancient Near East that also do the same thing. So there is a sort of a contextual issue here. Cultural context, where it doesn't matter what the actual count is, that you know, the society at large did this. And again, we don't know why. And it's going to take somebody doing a PhD dissertation on this to sort of untangle it all, to do the proper contextual work of Bronze Age documents to sort of figure it out. So anyway, thank you very much for the question and the follow-up. So we are going to take more here. So let's go. We're at the end of the super chats, and we're going to take some more non-super chats. I did see one other comment though. Mr. Rich B.O.B.'s follow-up. Thank you. I didn't think of land size. Yeah, you know, one doesn't, you know. But this is why geography is so important as we study these issues. You know, it's not just enough to study the history. We have to study the geography too, because the two are hand in glove. They're tied to each other. When I think of X amount in city Y, I tend to think actually X amount in city Y and its neighboring towns and wildernesses. Yeah. The whole area was surrounded by fields. So, you know, but this is how cities in the ancient world worked. Was you did have an urban area, and then the entire surrounding area was agricultural. Okay, so let's start answering some other questions here. actually, I saw this question that Mr. Rich B.O.B. gave earlier, and while I don't often answer the same question or questions from the same person twice here, this was actually kind of interesting. Jewish myth holds the first set of the Ten Commandments was on blue sapphire and the second on lapis. Makes sense given the blue strand on their tzitzits. Yeah, I could never have, I never wore a tzitzit myself. I could not ever bring myself to do that. Are blue sapphire lapis Egyptian symbols? What for? Now, they aren't. They aren't actually Egyptian symbols, although they're highly, highly prized stones. The lapis. We have to be a little careful here that because blue sapphire is not extant in ancient Egypt. Well, Egypt had a word for sapphire, saphir. It clearly is not, say, corundum, which is what we would call modern sapphire today. The Egyptians don't seem to have had a source for sapphire, and I believe the if my mineralogy serves me well, I believe the closest source of corundum is actually in India. So I don't believe the Egyptians had blue sapphire at the time. Lapis was actually an import from Afghanistan. Now, the Egyptians did import lapis from time to time. However, Moses would not have had that available to him on Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai lacks the mineralogy for both sapphire and lapis. It was probably a kind of granite or limestone. Either one is possible given the geology of the region, and both would have been perfectly ideal to put the Ten Commandments on it. Besides, lapis does not actually come in large enough sections to make tablets generally. Most lapis is extremely small, extremely fragmentary. Occasionally you find turquoise that will have sheets that size, but it's very rare. It's very, very rare. So anyway, it's a great question, and I worked as a jeweler for many years, so for me, these sort of questions are very, very interesting. I do enjoy these questions a lot. Okay. So let's take another. I'm going to take this one. White girl with Instagram black screen. JPED question. JSource uses anthropomorphic language and primitive theology of a tribal national god. EMP has a transcendent universal. How is this to be explained? Virtuosity of the author. That's how it's explained. One of the things I find really sort of disconcerting about the documentary hypothesis is the idea that an author, a change in sort of tone, of usage, of anthropomorphic versus nationalistic depictions of God indicates different authors. I really don't see this. This is one of those things that's sort of in the eye of the beholder. The critic sees this. This is what he finds. I don't think you need to explain this. I think they need to explain this to us. I think the burden of proof is on them to show us that anthropomorphic language versus primitive theology equals a different author. It's not on the burden of proof is not on us to explain why it's the same author. The burden of proof is on the critic to show why this has to be the case. And the fact is, when we take a look at, say, documents like the Ugaritic, the tablets at Ugarit, which sort of demonstrate the same sort of things, but are not the same author, or sort of not different authors, the critic really then has to explain, well then, why is it not true for Ugarit, but true for the Bible? The burden of proof is not on us. The burden of proof is on them. But they've put forth this hypothesis, and they claim it as absolute truth. And yet they still haven't proved the case. So, it's really incredulous. It's really incredulous. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay. Let's, I did see another super chat just come on from Carlo for $5. Thank you very much. Oh, wait. I did see, RG Strategy. I'll get back to you, RG Strategy, in just a moment here. So, for Carlo, thank you very much for the super chat for $5. Which scholars give the best arguments for unity of Flood story and Joseph story contra mainstream source critics? John Walton, I think, does a really good job of this. Honestly, I don't agree with everything Walton says, but I agree with a lot of what Walton says. John Walton and I sort of come at this with a sort of a similar approach, which is we're taking these stories in their historical and literary context, and then say, you know, looking at the comparisons and contrasts, and then, you know, coming up with our interpretations. So I would here recommend John Walton. I think his idea for the unity of, say, the Pentateuch, and my idea about the unity of the Pentateuch is more or less that these were stories that were, say, may have been oral in the past, but were ultimately committed to paper during Moses' wandering in the wilderness. And I think that seems to be very, very apparent because of the amount of, say, Egyptian words we find in Genesis. So when I look at, and we discussed one today, you know, when it talks about Abraham, you know, visiting Pharaoh. Well, Pharaoh is an 18th dynasty term. It's an 18th dynasty term. So it's very, very clear that the Genesis account was actually put to pen during roughly the 13th century BC. At least its source documents were. So, and that alone, that idea alone, goes against some more mainstream source critics. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, I did see RG Strategies here. Okay, RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. My $5 should be laugh out loud. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Your generosity and the generosity of all the super chatters do help us keep going. It is a major source of income for us. So we really, really appreciate every super chat that donates to this channel. We really can't do it without your help. There's a PC games developer that you might like, Builders of Egypt and Pharaoh, A New Era. Okay. You'll have to tell me what game he's building his mods for, but very, very much appreciate that. It's nice to know that the work we're doing on ancient Egypt not only goes to the community of faith, but actually helps game developers get good history too. You know, because frankly, one of the things that I think is really, really important to realize is that culture catechizes. Most people get their morality from popular culture. It's completely true that popular culture teaches morality more than our churches do. And it's especially now, since we are now in a position that, say, the minority of people attend church these days. So their greatest influence is actually on culture, and that's where most people are getting their source of morality and their source of truth is from popular culture, social media. And I think this is really, it's really important that we are able to reach out to the content creators, people who are creating the culture, who are say supplementing the culture, that like mod builders, and basically be able to show them, you know, this is real history. What we are talking about here. Yes, we are talking about ancient documents, but these ancient documents are written in the historical context of their time, and they are relating the events of their time as they see it. So I really appreciate what you're doing in basically bringing our work to game developers as well, because I think it's really important. It's one way we can actually extend what we do to the culture at large. So thank you very much for the super chat and the comment. Really appreciate it. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Just a comment, but what is funny about the documentary hypothesis is that Joel Baden, in his book, The Composition of the Pentateuch, and he goes, supplement, resurrects this. Yeah, I know. One of the issues I've had with Baden, I mean, Baden loves documentary hypothesis. I mean, he drank that. I mean, he swallowed that Kool-Aid. Oh, he gulped it down when he drank it. One of the issues I have with Baden, and everyone actually who subscribes to the documentary hypothesis, like for example, you can take the 10 plagues of Egypt. You take just the 10 plagues of Egypt, and you compare Driver, Friedman, Martin Noth, and Joel Baden. And each one of them will ascribe different sources for all 10 plagues. There's no consistency across the board. What that tells me, prima facie, that what that tells me, just right off the bat, is if nobody can agree for these sources that are supposed to be self-apparent, then there's nothing scientific about this. This is not a science. This is a subjective art, with emphasis on subjective. It's emotion and feeling and impression that's giving them this value, this analysis. Not actually anything objective. Nothing that you can, I mean, you know, getting sort of a straight sort of objective answer out of the documentary hypothesis is like nailing Jello to a wall. You know, it just won't stay. You know, and they basically keep trying to nail the Jello to the wall, and you know, every time they do this, they come up with a different result. You know, if I had a computer program, let's just say a straight deterministic computer program, you know, algorithmic program, you know, with no randomness or chaos, you know, programmed into it. And I ran that program and got one result. Ran again, get a different result. Ran it again, get a different result. And I keep repeating, I keep different result every time. I would say of that program that it had a bug, that it was defective, because it is not operating according to deterministic parameters. There's not the science there. The documentary hypothesis has a bug. It's got a serious bug. It's got serious inadequacies. And there have been lots of authors that have written about this. In the past, you had guys like, what's his name now? I can't remember it at the moment. But you got guys like Kilcore and Joshua and Berman in recent times who have also written on this. you know, it's had lots of critics. The documentary hypothesis has had lots of critics. It's dead in Europe and it just refuses to die in North America, and it really should. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Cheese One, thank you very much for the $5 Australian. Very much appreciate it. Sorry for layman's question. Oh, don't be sorry for that. You're giving me a super chat. I'll take layman's questions all day as long as I get super chats. But wanting to support you, and it's fun. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. One of the things we really do want to strive to do on this channel is to make education entertaining. We do try this, and we got a big surprise coming up for the next popcorn video too. So because we do, as I said, want to make this fun. Okay. Why couldn't ancients whip up their own box? I'm no traddy, but in a pinch. I'm not sure about the question. Do you understand that question? Nope. I'm glad you're supporting the channel. I just don't understand the question. So if you want to rephrase the question down below, we'll take it again. But I'm sorry, I just don't understand the question. But thank you very much, unless you mean Gamebox. But I appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. And thank you for the question, even if we didn't understand it. But again, put it down below and we'll look for it and try to answer it. Okay. 501 Mobius for $27. Well, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. Do you have any information on the Senate game? I'm currently coding the game and would use your translations of names or rules. Okay. This is one of the most... Now, wow. Here's the thing about Senate. We don't have the rules. I wish we did. There have been various people who have tried to revive the game of Senate. But we don't... The rules were never written down. We don't know how the Egyptians played it. There's a modern version of Senate that's being played today, but it's based upon a reconstruction that we don't exactly... That's more guesswork than scholarship. So it's like, well, we received the board today, we don't know how to play it, and we're just going to guess how to play it. That's sort of modern Senate rules. We don't actually have the rules. So as much as I'd love to give you the rules and give you the translations of the names, such, if there's Egyptian words on the Senate board, I can easily translate those for you. That's no problem. But we don't have the rules. I wish we did. It'd be really, really cool to learn how to play it, but we just don't have that. So I'd love to be able to do that, and especially given that you're coding a game, an electronic version of the game, it would be lots of fun. I admit, lots and lots of fun to play this game electronically. So I'm sorry I couldn't be more help here, but we just don't have that. The best you could probably do is use, say, the reconstructed rules that are being used right now, until we find something more or more authoritative. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I look forward to seeing your game. And it's good to see you here tonight. You haven't been on for a while, so we appreciate having you on again. I know it's very late for you, but again, really appreciate it. And it is a good question. It's a great question, but sometimes great questions don't have answers. Okay, let's see. I think I saw... where did I see? No, there was... I did see that Chis one there, he clarified his question. Tradesman. Ah, okay. Okay, this is the clarification to the question in the earlier super chat. I'm sure I could make a box without being a trained tradesperson, but your book outlines that a basic box was only for the wealthy. Yes, it was. But it wasn't just because of training. It was because that wood was a scarce, rare, and valuable commodity. That's the reason. We have to understand that in ancient Egypt, trees were uncommon. Most trees got cut down, used for funerary furniture, coffins, etc. Wood was expensive and valuable in Egypt. So it's not the reason why the basic box was only for the wealthy was just because wood was only for the wealthy. Think of it kind of today, you know, if you go and buy a silver box, your typical poor person doesn't own a lot of silver because it's an expensive material. So it doesn't matter how much how competent the craftsmanship is, or whether or not a lay person could make it, if they can't get the materials in the first place because they're expensive, then that limits one's ability to actually be able to do the craftsmanship. So that's the reason why that's why these boxes were only for the wealthy. It wasn't about training, although training did play a huge portion in this too, and that's some of that is because of wood was given to craftsmen who could conserve the wood as they did it. Because you didn't give a large piece of wood to a nobody. It was too precious. You gave your large pieces of wood to craftsmen who could do many separate items out of it. Your typical trained tradesperson in Egypt, your furniture builder in Egypt, could take a log and build lots of different pieces of furniture out of it, not just one. There was no waste. The Egyptians did not waste wood at all. Even little scraps were turned into inlays. So, you know, this was as much an exercise in conserving materials as it was in building. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for restating the question, because we do want to answer your questions. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Tony G for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Did Moses have a second wife, or is Zipporah the Cushite in Numbers 12:1? And why did Aaron and Miriam speak against Moses because of her? Okay. My opinion of this is that Zipporah is not the same woman as the Cushite in Numbers 12:1. I think what we have here is a second unnamed wife. Zipporah was a Midianite. She's not a Cushite. Pure and simple, the two are tribally unrelated, and I don't think there's any way you can even confuse a Midianite with a Cushite. Somebody from Egypt would have never confused the two. They look nothing alike. Cushites and Midianites look nothing alike. So I don't think Numbers 12:1 is talking about Zipporah. Now, the question is, what became of Zipporah? We don't really know. Is it possible that Moses was widowed and then remarried? Yes, that's entirely possible that he was widowed and then remarried. There is some idiosyncrasies against in Numbers 12 as to Aaron and Miriam speaking against Moses here because of her. there is the text will talks about, you know, how Miriam entered into the tabernacle, the tent of meeting in the tabernacle, and that was a definite no-no. That was a definite no-no. There does seem to be here an element of not that the Miriam and Aaron speaking against Moses because of her was a pretense for another matter. And that pretense seems to be who is allowed in the tent of meeting. Aaron, as a consecrated priest, it wouldn't have been no problem for him to enter into the tent of meeting. But Miriam was a woman. And women were not allowed in the tent of meeting, in the tabernacle. So, you know, you got to take that into account as we talk about this. Was there an attempt here by Miriam and Aaron to sort of democratize or over-democratize Israelite religion by allowing not just Aaronic priests into the tabernacle? So I think there's a lot here there's a lot of moving parts to this passage that I think really do need to be fleshed out here. But I think in the case of Zipporah, I don't think she's the Cushite in Numbers 12:1. The two tribal groups are distinct. They're distinct. They're well known that that Midian and Cush were, you know, not even close. They were not even close to each other. Cush is in Upper Egypt. Midian is on the closest would be the eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula, going into Edom and into Saudi Arabia. So, yeah. No, they're not the same person. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Sentinel apologizes for $2 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Daddy, I'll send a GoFund on the 22nd blessings. Well, thank you very much appreciated. It was a lot of fun engaging that video with the Valley of Healing. We've already, Sentinel gave me feedback that it's already helped and blessed a lot of people who were having problems within that group. And, you know, we do this as a ministry to people. Every time we are able to help somebody, you know, come to the knowledge of the truth in Jesus Christ, that's a win in that's a tick in the win category for us. So very, very much appreciate the opportunity to minister to these people. And I love talking to them as well. I've had a couple even reach me out to me already, and, you know, sort of strike up conversations. So again, this was a great blessing to me. I'm glad I could have helped. So again, thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for that opportunity. Okay, CNMK for $1.99. Could farmer Egyptians still afford to be married? Yes. Yes, they did marry. They usually married among their class. So a farmer would essentially marry someone from the farming class. So that's how they kind of sort of kept numbers going. The fact is that in the strata of ancient Egypt, farmers were at the very bottom. They were actually below slaves. The farming class was below slaves. And the reason why farmers were below slaves in social class was because that slaves typically had a very, very valuable skill. Think about slaves kind of like IT workers. They have very, very valuable skills, but they're not respected in any way. Not that I know anything about that. So, so for a farmer to marry a slave is almost sort of a step up, to be honest. However, most slaves did not have the right to marry on their own accord. So that actually very seldom happened. It didn't happen very often. But Farmers in Egypt were usually given a plot of land. They were given a license to a plot of land that they then had to work. And farmers then would marry, say the neighbor's daughter, because she, unless something extraordinary happened to her, that's typically what would happen. Is your next door neighbor, might have a daughter. She's of the farming class. She's not eligible to sort of move up in the social strata, so then she's married off to the neighbor. So yes, farmers in Egypt could afford to get married because, frankly, the farmers, or the woman he would marry, would also contribute to the labor of the land as well. Labor in ancient Egypt was not so much divided according to sex. So women worked the fields just like men did. So she would just be able to double the capacity of that farming plot just by marriage. And while one farmer might have too many children to use in a farm, he could marry them off to others who were able to. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, now we've hit an hour and a half here, so we are going to start winding it down. I will look for a couple more of non-super chats. Let's see here.
No, I know he's probably answered.
Yeah.
Rich B.O.B. Egyptian view of handedness.
Okay. Well, I almost never take non-super chats from the same person in a night. But my producer here has made a special request that I bring back Mr. Rich B.O.B. here for a third non-super chat. Oh, it's your lucky night, isn't it? What was the Egyptian view of handedness, left or right? Did the Egyptians or local people have a sign language for the deaf? Okay, let me answer the latter question first. We don't think so. We don't think they had a sign language for the deaf. We don't know exactly what accommodations they made for the deaf. And part of the problem with being deaf is you're also usually, oftentimes can't speak right either. So I don't think Egyptians were very nice to these people, people with disabilities. There were some disabilities that Egyptians did seem to treat a lot better. Dwarfism. For some reason, Egyptians really prized dwarfism. They were seen as sort of manifestation of the god Bes. So often dwarfs in ancient Egypt were highly educated, became scribes and important administrators. But other sort of disabilities like losing a limb or being deaf or blind were not treated so nice. So I don't think the deaf would have had much accommodation in ancient Egypt. Now, the Egyptian view of handedness. We do know that Egyptians did acknowledge right and left-handedness. It like every culture in the ancient world and in every society that we know of, right-handedness was considered to be normal. But we do have some records that talk about left-handedness also. And they make note of it. They view it as kind of strange. But it really wasn't too frowned upon either. You do get the occasional, talking about it being, say, unnatural. It may be the best way to describe the Egyptian view of, say, left-handedness. But that's pretty much the extent of it. because it didn't really play much. It wasn't seen as being it wasn't seen as a sign of evil. It wasn't seen as being sinister, or the sign as sinister as actually comes from the Latin meaning left-handed. So so we have it in our own language, where there's sort of this nascent view of left-handedness in, say, modern culture, that sort of is which we had inherited from medieval culture. But the Egyptians don't quite seem to have this view. They see it as sort of unnatural, but that's about the extent of it. So anyway, thank you for the question. And let's see, what else can we do? Okay, I'm going to take Louis Sandoval's question. He just popped in here. Hi, Louis. Why do you think that Abraham was an Amorite, also wouldn't have any theological problems since Israel fought Amorites? Okay. Well, the biblical text tells us, first of all, that that Israel, the sons of Jacob, were descended from Amorites. They also come from the region of Urkesh, which is in northern Mesopotamia. This is an area that was occupied by Amorites. So we have sort of got two pieces of evidence here that sort of points to Abraham being an Amorite. Okay. Now, this doesn't actually have theological problems. And the reason why it doesn't have theological problems is because alliances in the ancient Near East were very perfidious. They were fickle, very fickle. You could be allied with somebody in one generation and then go to war with them in the next. Like the Gibeonites. You know, they sign a peace treaty with the Gibeonites. Then by the time of David and Saul, they're at war with them again. We see this with the Midianites. You know, Midianites have very good relations with the people of Israel at the beginning, because Moses has married a Midianite woman. They are traveling and sharing the land. They're cooperating with each other. And then there's a betrayal. And close to the point where the Israelites have to enter Egypt, they start to go to war against the Midianites. So this is very, very much part and parcel to the politics of the ancient Near East, where you could be related to somebody, you can, you know, have you know, trade wives and treaties and all that, and then just a generation later, you're killing each other. This is really, really normal in ancient Near Eastern international affairs. So it's not a theological issue at all. It's absolutely not a theological issue. You know, it's just the way things work in the ancient Near East. And it's not once peace always at peace. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Okay. He also added, also received your book, and I am amazed as I begin reading it. Well, thank you very much. Again, for people who don't know what the book is, the book is The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context and Illustrated Journey.
Really great.
We've gotten some really, really amazing feedback from the book. We love hearing how people love the book. We got a comment just recently about how somebody took the book and, you know, shared it with her like 7-year-old daughter, and the daughter says, "Ooh, I love everything about Egypt. I want to become an Egyptologist."
It was asked. asking about the execution.
Yeah.
Others said, here, you know.
And it was just really heartwarming to see that, you know, people of all ages, all educations are really loving the book. We really went the extra mile to do the photographs for the book too. I basically took my entire advance for the book and spent it on a trip to Egypt to do the photographs for the book, because there were just some photographs that I really wanted in the book that I didn't have for my previous trips. So for me, this was the one sort of the great opportunity to go get those photographs and produce a book that we wanted this to be a book that would be last on the shelf for 50 years. Even if people didn't like, say, you know, the conclusions, they would still prize the pictures. They would prize, say, the beauty of the book. We wanted to create a book that was not just great scholarship, but it was an object of beauty. That's what we really strove to do. Create just an awesome, jaw-dropping book. So anyway, I'm very grateful that you purchased the book. It's sort of unfortunate that it came out during the year of COVID. It probably would have done a lot better if it hadn't, but we are now starting to see sort of sales pick up on it a bit. And we love hearing all the feedback of those who have actually bought it and read it. So thank you very much for the comment. Okay. I'm going to take Rufus Johns here. Question. Did ancient Egypt ever trade with Asia under Solomon? Now that is a very interesting question. Because there is evidence of trade between Egypt and Asia. And it goes back to roughly the late Bronze Age, at least. One of the things we find in, say tombs in the late Bronze Age is cloves. And cloves are a spice that we only find growing in India and, say, East. So there does seem to be some trade going on between at least Egypt and, say, India from the late Bronze Age onward. There's even some evidence of silk coming to Egypt, say, a little later during, say, the early Iron Age, during the 10th century. As this is the 10th century, Solomon would be right in the middle of that trade. So Solomon would be taxing the trade that's happening between Egypt and Asia. So there is evidence that trade was going on between Egypt and say, India and Asia. And Solomon would have been invariably there to collect the spoils of that trade, because Solomon had a chokehold on that trade. That's how Solomon got rich. Was he taxed all the caravans passing through the Fertile Crescent. If you wanted to go to Egypt or go to Asia from Egypt, you had to pass through Solomon's land. And he is going to tax everything that goes through it. It's unavoidable. You can't. There's no other way around that's safe and easy to do. So caravans paid the tax, and Solomon grew rich on it. So anyway, that's a very interesting question, and it's really interesting because we're seeing more and more and more of this trade going on. As you know, archaeology progresses, we even interestingly enough, there was actually an article that just came out today that Neo-Assyrian armor was found in northern China. This just came out. This is absolutely, I mean, the ink is barely dry on this article. They found Assyrian-style leather scale armor in northwestern China. And it dates to that period, to the Neo-Assyrian period. So that's a link that nobody had ever considered before, that they are actually trading military technology between, say, northwestern China, and Assyria. So the links between Asia and the Near East are getting stronger and stronger as the archaeology progresses here. So it's a fascinating question, absolutely a fascinating question. And again, more is being learned as the shovel turns. Anyway, thank you very much, Rufus, for the question. It's really an excellent question. It's an excellent question. Okay. We got a super chat for $20 from Vic M. Based upon a glance of the table of contents of Doug Petrovich's upcoming book, Origins of the Hebrews, has he made any new arguments for his early Exodus interpretation that you have not seen before and haven't addressed? You guys today are just killing me with these groaning questions. I mean, just... There is not a single argument that Doug has done that has not been adequately addressed. Wow, this book is a shambles. This book is looking to is going to be a train wreck. It's going to be a train wreck. He's done the strange move of using a creationist publisher to publish it. So, last time he published a book, he spent over 30 grand to publish it with what was it? I forget what the publisher, the last one was. Carta. He published it with Carta, which Carta is a respectable publisher. But he spent a huge amount of money on it because he didn't want to take a risk on it. Well, they didn't want to take a risk on a second book. He tried to publish it with Carta, and they said no. Nope, not going to happen. So he instead has published it with a creationist publishing press with no peer review at all. Or basically other creationists as peer reviewers. I mean, this is looking in like it's going to become a real train wreck. I know he keeps saying that he's alerted other scholars who to look at his book, to consider his arguments. If you really want to address my arguments, buy my book. If your arguments have no potential to begin with, who's going to buy your book? It's just crazy. The press, by the way, he's using, if anyone wants to know, is New Creation Press in Nashville. Okay. When I tried to look up this press, I couldn't find a website. I couldn't find a business address. I couldn't find anything for this press. It's not a press I have ever heard of. Perhaps I missed something. I mean, that's always possible. I mean, who knows? Maybe New Creation is an extension of Random House. Publishing is so volatile that can happen. But I couldn't find this publisher to save my life. And it looks like it's given their press titles that they are a creationist press. So, wow. It's just very. This book is just turning out to be very, very strange. I haven't like for example, one argument I noticed he's sort of leaked ahead of time was that the Pharaoh of the Exodus couldn't be a firstborn because of the 10th plague. Well, it's a very strange argument because the biblical text of the 10th plague specifically excludes Pharaoh from being affected by the 10th plague. So, you know, it's just like stuff like this just doesn't make any sense. So he might have some new arguments, but if they're the same quality arguments he's had in the past, you know, doesn't much matter if they're new. If he's really sort of become very strange and very second rate in his scholarship. I've really am surprised on how quickly his scholarship sort of degenerated from just sort of fringe to almost sort of David Roll kind of lunatic fringe. I'm not gonna, I mean, I bought his first book. I'm not gonna buy the second book. This is because I'm expecting this to be just really sort of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs is what I'm expecting. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. You got my opinion on it. there. Take it for the proverbial grain of salt it is. All right. And I think we have one more super chat there. Another one from Louis Sandoval for, I think it's Dominican Republic pesos, 250. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think that Adam and Eve perceive Sumerian culture like Göbekli Tepe or Geroft culture, or are they Sumerian? Oh, I think they long precede that. Long preceded. I think there's even some potential that they even preceded Göbekli Tepe. But then again, too, what we're talking about here is, are we talking here as what is the historical Adam and Eve? And I do affirm a historical Adam and Eve, but I also affirm that Adam and Eve are also literary archetypes as well. So, if we talk about, say, the historical Adam and Eve here, I think what we're talking about is someone who long predates human civilization or culture. So, long before Sumeria, long before, say, the ancient cultures, you had Adam and Eve. And when we start going back that far in time, things get really, really murky. You know, even if we go back just to Göbekli Tepe, you know, there's no written texts. We've got a temple with pictographs on the wall, not language, just pictographs of animals. We don't have anything to tell us what actually happened at Göbekli Tepe other than what is archaeologically in the dirt. So we got no texts, no human writing at that point. Human writing had not been invented yet, at least as far as we can tell. You know, human writing only goes back to about 3000, 3100 BC. Anytime before then, we're in many ways guessing. Or at least trying to piece it together from archaeological remains. Now, with something like Göbekli Tepe that dates to 10, 12,000 BC, yeah, we have no idea. We have no idea how they lived, the culture, all that, apart from the archaeology of the site. You go back further to Adam and Eve, well, yeah, how do you even put that together? How do you even put that together? You know, two people are not going to leave much in the way of archaeological remains. So, yeah, so, it may not be the most satisfying answer, but, you know, again, sometimes I don't know is the best answer. So anyway, I do appreciate the super chat, and at least we had the opportunity here to discuss some of the issues involved. But anyway, I want to thank you for that super chat. I very much appreciate it. And it is still a good question. And it did give us the opportunity to talk about Sumeria and Göbekli Tepe as well. So that's always a fun too. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Anyway, let's see here. I am going to see about one more non-super chat. And then we're going to call it a night. She says, y'all don't give Dr. Falk a headache. Too late. Okay, let's see here. Ooh. Bing put one of my favorite questions at the end here. Okay, we're going to make this the last non-super chat for the night. If someone slips in a super chat, oh yeah, we'll still take the super chat. But this is going to be the last non-super chat of the night. Okay. What were the ancient Egyptian punishments for adultery? Now, the whole question of adultery in ancient Egypt revolves around class. It all revolves around the social strata of Egypt. It was always expected that a married woman would only have relations with her husband. But that did not prevent a marriage from being a revolving door. Both men and women have what's called now, the right to marry and divorce at will. A woman could call just a second here. Oops, mouthwash here. Wait, I have a super chat. Okay. Yep, we'll wait for your super chat. It's not too late. But let's get back to Bing's question here. Okay. So both men and women had the right to marry and divorce on their own prerogative. So normally what happened in the case of adultery was there would just be a messy divorce. Messy usually meant that that there might be a law court involved with the division of property, although most of the time property division in divorce cases in Egypt was so well established that the courts didn't usually need to get involved. But there were some times, like for example, where a worker at Deir el-Medina got a ration of food that that a divorced spouse could claim part of that ration, and because that ration didn't fall under the normal, say, 2/3, 1/3 split of property, that there would be a court case over it. So in those cases, sometimes divorces went to court, but most of the time, the punishment for adultery was simply divorce. Now, there were exceptions to this, and exceptions happened when there was an egregious transgression of class. Like, for example, if a high-ranking woman committed adultery with a slave, that was an egregious violation of class, and that could end up with her having either her nose or ears cut off, and in the case of the slave, be turned over for a capital punishment. Hence, this is where we get the story of Joseph from. Is what you have in the case of Joseph is not just adultery. The punishment there, why the death penalty loomed over Joseph's head, wasn't because he was accused of committing adultery. It was because he was accused of committing adultery and rape, essentially, with a high-ranking woman. And Potiphar's wife threw him under the bus because the potential punishment for her was having her nose cut off. And having your nose cut off is really, really a serious punishment. It's a disfiguring punishment that turns you into a social pariah. My wife and I did a little side trip to Tombstone, Arizona one year when we were on a business trip to Tucson. And there was a photograph of a Native American woman who had had her nose cut off as a punishment for adultery. And it is utterly disfiguring. It is utterly disfiguring. And it's really hard to see. It's really hard to see. It's a punishment that one should never ever underplay or understate. It's a serious thing. So that was normally, say, the maximum punishment for adultery. In the case of the higher class woman, it would have been, say, disfigurement. In the case of a lower class person, it would be, say, up to execution. Normally, though, and execution in Egypt usually was the result of one of two methods, which was either they either sliced your throat or they strangled you to death with rope. So that's how executions were typically done in ancient Egypt. But normally, like 99% of the time, most adultery in ancient Egypt ended in divorce, and that's because you could get out of divorce so easily. You know, the fact is that, you know, if there was even sort of the hint that your husband was going to accuse you of adultery, you could just claim, "Nah, divorce you right now." That's it. You're divorced. So, you know, why go through the whole penal process when you can just get out of it with a word? And that's all you had to do to divorce in ancient Egypt, was just say, "Hey, I'm divorcing you." And it's done. That's it. So, you know, no one hangs around for a criminal trial when you can just get out of it with a word. So, serious punishment for adultery was really, really rare in Egypt. It's really, really rare. Just because people exercised common sense in these matters. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I see we got 2 more super chats here, and let's take them. So, Louis Sandoval again for DOP 250. Thank you very much for the super chat. What makes theophanies in the Old Testament or any ancient Near East or whichever ancient culture as valid and real, and how did they make contact? Well, that's a good question. Now, theophanies in almost any religion are rare. There is nothing common at all about theophanies. As far as I can recall, I don't think there was ever, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 recorded theophanies in Egyptian texts. They're exceptionally rare. You don't find them in Egypt. Pretty much. I mean, you really only find them mentioned. You might find 1 or 2 in Mesopotamian literature. I'm not quite sure on the literature here. You don't seem to find them in Ugaritic literature. You do find them, though, in Israelite literature. And how did they make contact? Often they made contact through, say, there's several ways that theophanies often make contact, but usually it was through direct visitation. The god would take on, say, a human-like form, and it's kind of sort of understood that these are not real flesh. They're not incarnations. And we have to sort of keep that in mind, is what's being shown here is not an incarnation, but a visage. Essentially, these theophanies and manifestations of spiritual beings are taking on the visage of human form, which means they are like human, but they're not human. So what does that mean? That means that they look humanish. They don't have blood. They don't have flesh. They don't have DNA. They cannot reproduce. Okay. So that is what we're sort of talking about here, is a spirit taking on a visage that looks human, and that's how the theophany often manifests. Now, in some cases, theophanies do show up in different ways. Sometimes it's shining light, as in the case of Paul on the road to Damascus. It can be the cloud opening up and a dove coming down, as in the Transfiguration. There's several ways that theophanies can take form. You have, say, the theophany of Yahweh visiting Abraham and Sarah as like a man, as the son, as like the Son of Man, where Abraham says, prepare food for this blessed guest. So we have to understand that when God does do theophanies, or we can even say when angels even manifest, they're doing so in such a way that they have parity with us. Okay? And by parity, I mean that there's a commonality of the way we communicate. Angels are not speaking in angelic tongues when they want to communicate a message to us. And neither does God, because we wouldn't understand it. I mean, if God came down to me and started talking in Swahili, I couldn't understand it. I would not. I mean, we've already seen my aptitude with German tonight, and and it was none too good. So if God wanted to come down and talk to me directly, he wouldn't be talking to me in German or Swahili. He'd be talking to me in English, because that's where we would have parity. God has to sort of condescend to our level to be able to communicate with us. So theophanies are a form of condescension. They're a way of God showing solidarity with mankind by taking on mankind's attributes temporarily and speaking in mankind's language temporarily, to have that solidarity, to be able to have some sort of exchange in communication. Because if you do not have an exchange in communication, it's nothing but a light show. It's nothing but a light show. And God wants more than a light show here. He wants people to understand who he is. So I think that is generally how the theophanies manifested. I think this is very consistent with even, say, later Christological language that we find in the New Testament, where God became flesh and dwelt with us, basically tabernacled with us. He tabernacles with us. He sits in the tents with us as fully God, fully man, so that he has solidarity with man, so that he could communicate and act as a savior, as that intercessor between God and man. So that's how I believe theophanies worked in the Old Testament. The other ancient Near Eastern religions just don't have enough information about theophanies to really sort of pull together anything coherent here. So, anyway, that is my take on theophanies. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and mouthwash for 15 Israeli shekels. Thank you very much for the super chat. I'm glad you could make it tonight. We do miss you when you're not here, so I'm glad you're here. Okay. The Egyptian flood myth involves blood caused by Sekhmet. When and where does it originate? And is it in any way related to the plague of blood? Okay, no, it is not related to the plague of blood. Although it could be. There is some possibility that and again, remember what we're talking about here in blood is ooey gooey black oozy slime crude oil type of look of blood here. And Sekhmet is a very vicious deity. I mean, she is just a nasty piece of work. And from what I recall of the myth and it's been a while since I've looked at the Sekhmet flood myth, is that they have to actually get her drunk to put her to sleep so that they can sort of wash out the Nile and make it new again. It's not a flood in the truest sense. It's more of the sort of the annual inundation of the flood that she sort of participates in. But it's also sort of the case too that the Egyptians didn't always see the Nile at the. This is the river turning to blood only ever happened at the very initial stage of the Nile inundation. And it was considered to be a very rare event. It's happened a couple times in Egyptian history. We find it happening recorded once in the prophecy of Nefertiti, and that's believed to have been around 2100 BC. So it doesn't happen very often. It's a very rare event. And it does seem to happen with a particularly high inundation cycle. But the Sekhmet myth is very old too. Do we know where it originated? No, not really. I might be able to research it and find out a little more about it, but I haven't looked into it all that much because it's frankly, I haven't started my research on that book yet, because we're still sort of trying to secure funding to do that book. But it is interesting. I mean, I don't think it is related to the Plague of Blood, except for it might be a similar event that happened in the past, because we do find that event, you know, recurring in ancient Egypt a couple times. So, but it is rare. It is rare. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hope that answered your question. Rachel Enns saying hey from the Okanagan. Well, hello. Wow. Cool. Well, you're not exactly local for us, for people who are who know the geography of British Columbia. It's a huge province. So she is actually a long ways away from Vancouver. But it's good to see a fellow British Columbian on the live stream. It's cool. That's really cool. Okay, and she leaves a super chat. Wow, thank you very much. Are the hieroglyphs in this background made with stamps pressed in soft clay? They seem so uniform and repeatable. Archaeological evidence. No, this was the hieroglyphs in my background picture here are actually from a tomb on the Giza Plateau. So they're actually carved in stone. The whole sort of Giza Plateau is made of limestone. So most of the tombs on the Giza Plateau do have some hieroglyphs that are actually carved into the stone itself. So that is really what we are looking at here. Is this? I mean, I get where you could think that was clay. I mean, it did have a reddish color. It does have a reddish color. But the reddish color actually comes from something called desert varnish. And we do find in sort of desert climates where stone over time, even if it's soft or granular, will often develop a darker varnish over it because sand gets blown onto it and starts to discolor by abrasion. So what we have here is a beautiful set of hieroglyphs that were carved into the native stone. And this is a subterranean tomb on the Giza Plateau. It's very close to the pyramid of Khufu. So this is roughly contemporary with the time of Khufu. He's the builder of the Great Pyramid. and it's subterranean, but this is sort of the area that's exposed to the door and the corridor. So in ancient times, it had a lot of exposure to, say, the elements. So that's why it's kind of got that look of baked clay, even though it is stone. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a wonderful tomb. It's one of the I mean, there's actually several wonderful tombs at Giza, and I actually prefer mastabas over pyramids. I hate pyramids. I hate pyramids so much. Oh, I hate pyramids. I know I've said that repeatedly, but I just so hate pyramids. But what I love is the mastabas and tombs that often surround pyramids. Some of the best tombs in all of Egypt are actually mastabas because they're beautifully decorated. They've got great hieroglyphs. They've got interesting inscriptions. Mastabas are wonderful. Pyramids suck. So this was in one of the tombs that were one of the satellite mastabas that was around, say, the pyramid of King Khufu. So anyway, that's the information regarding the background there. Anyway, thank you very much for that super chat, and it's so great to see you here, and great to find out that you're from the Okanagan. Fantastic. Okay, so I think we're going to call it a night here. We've been actually going for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I want to thank everyone who has participated tonight. Thanks again to everyone who donated a super chat. I want to thank our Patreon supporters. You guys actually really help us to buy new equipment and to upgrade our stuff. Without it, I mean, we've now been going as a channel now for about 18 months. Yeah, I know it seems like we just started this, but it's been 18 months. And, you know, going back to, say, our very first videos that we ever did, where it was some webcam from the 1980s and a clip-on speaker microphone, and you know, looking at the quality of those videos, and it's just like, wow, it was that bad. We've been slowly making incremental improvements to equipment as we go along here, but I again want to thank all the Patreon supporters because you guys have really helped us to upgrade our equipment, and we so appreciate it. I want to thank you to the people who are trying to help us get our next book written through GoFundMe. And I want to also thank all our subscribers. You guys watch the channel. For every person who watches a video on the channel, that feeds the YouTube algorithm. When the YouTube algorithm gets fed, they promote the videos more. And that ultimately helps us. So even just by watching, you're helping us. So anyway, with that said, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.